For the vast majority of listeners, the tale of Rome's ascent appears preordained. The formidable legions, the unwavering discipline, the vast network of roads spanning continents. It all seems like the inevitable progression of an empire fated to rule the Mediterranean. Yet history is far less predictable. Empires do not ascend because they are destined. They rise because their competitors falter. And long before Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, it existed under the looming presence of a profoundly different kind of superpower. This was not a city that built its empire by the sword, but through commerce. It did not depend on legions, but on liquid capital. It challenged Rome not with a rival ideology, but with a superior economic system. And for a critical period, it seemed entirely possible that it would prevail. Welcome to a space where currency, influence, and the past converge. Here the narrative is never as straightforward as it seems. To comprehend how Carthage almost thwarted Rome's rise, you must first discard the conventional framing of ancient history. Rome is typically presented as the apex of order and civilization, while Carthage is often diminished to a mere footnote, a prosperous trading hub that produced a single famous general before disappearing. But that version is not only overly simplistic, it misses the entire essence of the story. Carthage represented the first significant economic adversary Rome ever confronted. Its power did not stem from gladiators or epic heroes. It originated from something far more contemporary: intricate trade networks, groundbreaking financial practices, globalized supply chains, and a ruling class that functioned like the executive board of a vast multinational enterprise. Centuries before Venice, Amsterdam, or Wall Street, Carthage was constructing a commercial empire that transformed the entire Mediterranean into its private marketplace. Established by Phoenician settlers from Tyre around 814 BCE, Carthage started as a modest trading post and evolved into a dominant force by mastering three critical domains: maritime navigation, commerce, and logistical superiority. Unlike Rome, which expanded by seizing and occupying land, Carthage grew by controlling strategic choke points: Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, the North African coast, and later the mineral-rich regions of Spain. Carthage had no need for endless farmland or massive conscripted armies. It possessed harbors, shipyards, merchants, and immense capital reserves. The city's ingenious double harbor, an outer basin for commercial traffic and an inner circular one for the navy, stood as a technological wonder of its age. At its heart was an artificial island that served as an admiral's command post, surrounded by ship sheds that allowed Carthage to deploy or repair its fleets with unparalleled speed. This was not merely a port, it was the very engine of economic dominance. Rome, in stark contrast, began as a landlocked agrarian society. Its wealth was rooted in agriculture, and its military strength was drawn from its citizen body. Its economy was simpler, more localized, and slower to mobilize. In its early centuries, Rome displayed little interest in naval warfare or commercially driven expansion. It was a land empire in gestation, not a maritime one. For a time, as long as Rome remained focused on the mainland and Carthage dominated the seas, the two civilizations could coexist. But the Mediterranean is not an environment designed for peaceful coexistence. It is an arena built for fierce competition. That competition eventually exploded into the series of conflicts we now call the Punic Wars, three protracted, devastating struggles between Rome and Carthage, fought over wealth, access to markets, and control of maritime influence. At their core, these wars were not about cultural differences or opposing ideologies. They were a clash of economic systems. One side constructed power through territorial control and human capital. The other built it through trade networks and financial capital. When two ascending economies attempted to dominate the same crucial trade routes, conflict became a matter of cold arithmetic, not ancient hatred. The tipping point arrived when both powers reached for the same invaluable prize: Sicily. Sicily was far more than just another island. It was the gateway to vital maritime trade routes, a crucial hub for grain supplies, and the pivotal hinge connecting the western and eastern Mediterranean. To control Sicily was to control the economic arteries of the ancient world. Rome sought security from a rival power. Carthage sought the substantial revenue the island generated. When two ascending powers covet the same asset, war becomes less a question of if and more a question of when. The First Punic War erupted not because the two civilizations despised one another, but because they shared the same strategic calculation. Whoever held Sicily would dictate the future balance of power. Carthage entered this conflict as the seasoned naval hegemon, confident in its formidable fleets and its professional mercenary forces. Rome entered as an utter novice at sea. Yet here is where the financial narrative begins to fork. Rome, acutely aware of its weakness, did not hesitate to innovate. It reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian warship, constructed hundreds of replicas, and financed this colossal naval buildup through loans and public contributions on a scale previously unseen in Roman history. Carthage relied on its established strengths. Rome willed new ones into existence. This conflict was not merely a fight over territory. It was a collision between a mature commercial economic system and a militarized financial system that was rapidly learning how to leverage public credit. To grasp why Carthage was so distinct, you must examine its unconventional economic model. Rome fought wars with its citizens. Carthage fought wars with its capital. The Carthaginian military was predominantly mercenary-based, comprising Numidian cavalry, Iberian infantry, Balearic slingers, and Greek specialists. Carthage purchased talent, expertise, and tactical adaptability. It approached warfare as a commercial venture, and as long as its treasury remained full, this system performed exceptionally well. Carthage could project power across vast distances without conscripting its own populace or disrupting its core economic activities. Trade continued to flow even during wartime. Its merchants kept accumulating wealth. Its naval supremacy allowed it to levy taxes on shipping and extract tribute from client cities. However, every economic model possesses a fundamental flaw. For Carthage, that flaw was structural, an intrinsic reliance on capital rather than national cohesion. If the money ceased, the soldiers departed. Roman soldiers were loyal citizens. Carthaginian soldiers were contracted employees. Rome's strength often intensified under hardship. Carthage's position deteriorated the moment payments became uncertain. Following its defeat in the First Punic War, Carthage faced bankruptcy under the weight of its mercenary wage obligations. The mercenary war that ensued was one of the most brutal conflicts in antiquity, not because Carthage's enemies were overwhelmingly powerful, but because its entire financial model imploded under stress. A war financed by credit ended in a rebellion fueled by unpaid invoices. Yet Carthage responded in an extraordinary manner. It rebuilt its economy through innovation, not surrender. Hamilcar Barca, father of the legendary Hannibal, pivoted Carthaginian strategy towards Spain, where abundant silver mines offered a fresh financial foundation. Here Hamilcar created something unprecedented, a semi-private empire. The Barcid family operated like a sovereign corporation, utilizing Spanish mineral wealth to restore Carthage's military might, without being beholden to the city's volatile internal politics. This was corporate financing, centuries before the concept had a name. And this is the precise moment when a figure enters the narrative, whom even those unfamiliar with history recognize, though usually stripped of all his economic significance. Hannibal. Most know him as one of history's greatest military commanders. But in this story, his importance is not merely tactical. It is fundamentally financial. Hannibal was the living embodiment of Carthage's economic model. He was an executive general commanding a multinational army, paid for with Spanish silver, supplied through extensive trade networks, and designed to shatter Rome's economy, not just defeat its legions. His campaign became legendary not only for crossing the Alps with elephants, but for nearly dismantling Rome's system of alliances, disrupting its tax base, and threatening the very financial stability of the Republic. Hannibal was not just a commander. He was Carthage's economic strategy incarnate. That was the moment Rome grasped the profound truth. Carthage was not merely a military rival. It was an economic one. Rome was not only fighting soldiers. It was battling a commercial empire that could generate capital faster than Rome could mobilize legions. Hannibal's campaign across Italy was not about winning pitched battles alone. It was about severing Rome's alliances, crippling its revenue streams, and crushing its economic confidence. In modern parlance, Hannibal was waging a war of financial attrition. And yet Rome adapted once more. It learned to borrow on a massive scale. It raised taxes. It nationalized land. It sold public assets. A Rome under extreme pressure laid the foundations of the sophisticated fiscal state that would eventually dominate the Mediterranean. In a very real sense, Carthage forced Rome to evolve economically, institutionally, and strategically. Carthage made Rome into the Rome we remember. As the Second Punic War raged, the Mediterranean became a testing ground for two competing economic models. Rome and Carthage were not simply contesting territory. They were stress testing which financial system could survive a prolonged, high-intensity conflict. Carthage relied on liquidity, its immediate ability to pay, hire, and maneuver. Rome relied on solvency, its deeper capacity to mobilize resources, endure suffering, and leverage credit over the long term. In warfare, liquidity can deliver stunning early victories, but solvency wins the protracted game. Hannibal understood this asymmetry perfectly. He did not march into Italy expecting to conquer Rome in a single siege. He marched into Italy to destabilize Rome's economy, fracture its coalition of allies, and compel its dependent states to defect. If Rome's tax base collapsed, its creditworthiness would collapse alongside it. And once Rome's credit vanished, the war would be over. But Carthage underestimated a principle that would later define the Roman Empire. Rome could survive catastrophic losses that would obliterate any other state. When Hannibal annihilated tens of thousands of Roman soldiers at Cannae, Rome did not capitulate. It raised new armies. When Italian cities defected, Rome tightened its control over its remaining territories. When tax revenues plummeted, Rome borrowed from its aristocracy, who staked their personal fortunes on the Republic's survival. This was economic patriotism on a scale Carthage could not replicate. Not because Carthaginians were less loyal, but because their political and financial systems were engineered for profitable trade, not for a fight to the death. Carthage had merchants. Rome had mobilization. Compounding this, Carthage's own political elite hesitated to give Hannibal their full support. The merchant oligarchy, anxious about disrupting lucrative trade routes and sacrificing commercial revenue, refused to provide him with consistent reinforcements. They assessed the war as a board of directors evaluates a risky investment, cautiously, distrustfully, and with a sharp eye on quarterly losses. Hannibal, for all his brilliance, faced a structural disadvantage. He was fighting a state unified by citizenship with an empire that was, in effect, a collection of separate profit centers. Rome could sustain immense sacrifices for decades. Carthage constantly sought to minimize them. In a contest of attrition, that difference is fatal. Rome eventually launched its own economic counteroffensive. It shifted the primary theater of war to Spain and North Africa, aiming to sever Carthage's revenue sources, particularly the Spanish silver mines that financed Hannibal's campaign. Scipio Africanus, Rome's rising strategic mind, understood that Carthage did not need to be conquered outright. It needed to be defunded. When Scipio captured New Carthage in Spain, he did not merely seize territory. He confiscated supply depots, took hostages, captured treasury stores, and severed communication networks. This was an economic decapitation strike. Carthage's assets were no longer secure. Its revenue streams were compromised, and its strategic flexibility began to evaporate. By the time Scipio landed in Africa, Carthage was operating under a financial deficit it could no longer conceal. It scrambled to hire fresh mercenaries, raise emergency funds, and negotiate support from Numidian allies, who had grown wary of Carthage's inconsistent commitments. In the final showdown at Zama, Carthage entered the battlefield already financially exhausted. The war had drained its treasury, splintered its alliances, and forced it into compromises that eroded its strategic autonomy. Rome's victory was not just a military triumph. It was the inevitable outcome of two diametrically opposed economic approaches colliding under the extreme pressure of total war. Carthage's defeat in the Second Punic War led to decades of financial suffocation. Rome imposed indemnities so crushing that they transformed Carthage from a commercial superpower into a wealthy yet tightly restricted city-state. And yet, remarkably, Carthage rebuilt its economy once again, this time through agricultural innovation, manufacturing, and renewed commercial ties. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Carthage was once again flourishing. It grew so prosperous that Roman senators became deeply alarmed. Their fear was not military, it was economic. Cato the Elder is said to have ended every speech, regardless of topic, with the phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed." Not because Carthage threatened Rome with armies, but because it threatened Rome by proving its enduring commercial relevance. The final total destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE was not merely an act of wartime atrocity. It was a financial elimination, the deliberate eradication of a commercial rival that refused to remain defeated. And here is where the story transitions from the ancient world to our own. The conflict between Rome and Carthage was not a tale of good versus evil, civilization versus barbarism, or destiny versus decline. It was, at its heart, a story about economics, the contest between a trade-based empire and a territorial empire, between a system that outsourced its military power and one that embedded it into the fabric of citizenship, between a state that relied on liquid capital and a state that relied on systemic credit. Replace the triremes with container ships, the silver mines with rare earth minerals, the mercenaries with private military contractors. The parallels grow strikingly evident. Observe today's geopolitical landscape. Certain powers project influence through global trade networks, supply chain dominance, infrastructure investment, and commercial leverage. Others project influence through military alliances, forward bases, and long-term credit capacity. Some prioritize flexible mobile capital. Others prioritize national mobilization and industrial depth. Some construct economic empires. Others build territorial spheres of influence. And when these models collide, in trade wars, proxy conflicts, resource competition, or maritime tensions, the underlying dynamics are not new. They are ancient, thoroughly tested, and profoundly predictable. Carthage's model resembles modern commercial powers that rely on trade route control, logistical dominance, and financial mechanisms to shape global affairs. Rome's model resembles states that fuse military identity with intense political unity, capable of absorbing tremendous losses through taxation, borrowing, and national cohesion. Just as in antiquity, the critical question is not which system is morally superior, but which system is structurally more sustainable under duress. The economic foundations of power ultimately determine the military outcomes of conflict, not the other way around. Yet the deeper lesson is more nuanced. Carthage's ultimate failure was not that it relied on economics. It was that it never successfully fused its formidable economic engine with a resilient sense of political and social solidarity. In times of prosperity, its system thrived magnificently. In times of existential crisis, it fractured. Rome, by contrast, learned to transmute crisis into cohesion. It built institutions that transformed financial strain into a source of political unity. Its citizens did not just fund the state, they felt they were the state. History repeatedly demonstrates that when financial systems collide, the side with the stronger social contract, not necessarily the fuller treasury, typically prevails. In the end, Carthage challenged Rome with the pure force of economics. Rome responded by radically reinventing its own economic foundations, and that outcome reshaped the Mediterranean, the ancient economy, and the very DNA of empire. Carthage taught Rome the indispensable value of naval power, sophisticated credit mechanisms, foreign campaigning, and economic flexibility. Rome, in the very act of defeating Carthage, absorbed its lessons. The victor became the student. The vanquished became the blueprint. And that is the enduring, somewhat uncomfortable truth. Economic systems do not merely compete in isolation. They merge, they evolve, and they overwrite one another. Carthage lost the war, but Rome inherited its world. History does not repeat itself verbatim, but if you fail to understand its rhythms, it will overwhelm you just the same. If this perspective shifted your view, consider subscribing. The past holds the keys to our present.